Hello and welcome to Spyhards podcast. I'm Agent Scott,
And I'm Cam the Provocateur, booking a one-way ticket to Greece.
where you will stay, I hope.
Well, we'll see. I'm going to attempt a climbing stunt, and, I've never really been good at climbing, Scott, and, you've packed all my equipment, so I'm a little nervous.
And to be fair, I might have picked the wrong rope color.
Or you just didn't send rope at all.
I didn't actually. To be fair, you've got a lot of carabiners, no rope.
True. Yes.
But go climb a rock, as a captain once said. But we're back with part 2 of our Rick Sylvester interview. This time focusing on his work in For Your Eyes Only, and also sort of the postscript, as you said last time, Cam, about sort of how Bond has had an effect on his career and what he's gone on to do post Bond, because people's careers do go on past that. I think this is another great interview, another great part of that interview. I'm just so pleased we can bring it to you. So without further ado, let's get to the magic. Rick Sylvester, part 2, Cam. Fire it up.
I want to seg just, we've talked already about For Your Eyes Only, but I was just curious because, the stunt in Spy Who Loved Me is considered the big iconic one. That's the one that is going to be the most famous, obviously, between the two. But which one was more difficult? Which one was more sort of hair-raising to actually pull off?
Well, again, neither was really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the, that's why I say that Gravity really deserved to equal or maybe even greater credit than I. The first one, I have to do a very short ski run, drop the poles, go into space, release the skis, open the parachute, and land safely. And one of the great things about Baffin Island compared to Yosemite, where 2 or 3 times I'd hit trees, novice skydiver that I was and remain to this day, I had an interest in skydiving. It didn't compare to things like climbing, skiing, and distance running. It wasn't like you have to hit your mark and everything's perfect and all that. It wasn't like a couple of years ago, a climbing friend of mine, Jonathan Chester, said that there's an article mentioning you in the Guardian. There was an article, 25 best stunts in cinematic history. So he sent me this. I think it came out a couple of years ago. I got demoted to 2nd place, but this was better, more special than whether it was Time or Newsweek, which years ago said it's the greatest stunt in the history of cinema. Even though I'm in 2nd place, to be in the same article as people like Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, and then my film idol, Buster Keaton, and ahead of them, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, that was very special. They actually had me behind something that, the French New Wave. What's the French actor? He was a boxer originally. He was in Don't Shoot the Piano Player by Truffaut.
It wasn't Belmondo, was it?
Yeah, John Paul Belmondo, exactly.
Yeah.
My mind is going quickly. I'm having trouble remembering things. It's very concerning. Anyway, they actually, again, this is subjective. I love John Paul Belmondo, so I'm in only a few films, but actually I disagree with that was better than this. But anyway, to be listed in the same piece as people like, the ones I just mentioned, especially Buster Keaton, was very special. Now, but it was not. These things are not difficult. Now, the For Your Eyes Only, this is even simpler than the Bond thing. I just have to fall backwards. I have a stone in my hand that he grabs on the way down when he gets kicked over the edge. This time, I don't even have to do anything except fall. Hopefully, not do a bunch of tumbling, but keep your head up and your feet below. And it was just a couple years ago that I was very nervous about this, and then the reason hit me. I was out for my daily run. Well, the ski base jump, I'd at least done it 3 times. Despite decades of climbing, I'd never had a long fall. So that was scary. And the production crew would have been happy with a fall half the length I did. But what happened when I was scouting for a location? Sometimes you do a long fall, and again, I hadn't done any. You oscillate. You start swinging at the bottom. Well, I found, and you may smack into the wall. I found a rock formation in the Meteor in Greece that was overhanging at the bottom. So if I'd gone something like 80 feet, half the rope length, I may have smacked in. But if I went the whole length, it was a bomb that was overhanging. I had a greater chance of not hitting it. So I said, I'll do the whole rope length. And as soon as I said that, I regretted it. And that began the nights of sleeplessness, worried about this huge fall. So that you know, I'm no daredevil. You know, Rick's calculated, and I'll tell you something I've never mentioned before. Again, a modern climbing rope, it can be cut going over a sharp edge, sometimes even an edge that doesn't seem that sharp, especially if it's continually hits against it. But I wasn't taking any chances. I actually had two ropes. I spent an hour the night before. Somehow, what if there's one defective rope coming out of the factory? I've never heard that happen. It probably never has happened. But I actually had two ropes. I spent an hour putting, I'm not sure what the British term is, rubber bands to keep them running the length of this, 150, 160, 50 meter rope. I had rubber bands. So if you saw them separate, you'd realize there were two ropes, which wouldn't make any sense. So I actually had two ropes attached to me, though it looks like one. And one of them goes into, well, that's another story, that how it happened. That and one of them is anchored separately. When The Spy Who Loved Me was finished, I mentioned to someone, and again, it could have been Broccoli, if you ever have a climbing film, a future Bond film that involves climbing, please keep me in mind. I'm not the world's best climber, but I'm experienced. So that was why I got the work on the second film. Again, the first one, I was the only one who did the thing. So, but there are many climbers much better than I. And so when I saw the script, and again, climbing, most of it's very slow, but not spectacular, but a fall is spectacular. And so, a modern climbing rope, unlike a caving or spelunking, in Britain they call it potholing. There's two types of ropes. There's static and there's dynamic. In caving, where you're either rappelling, abseiling down the rope or climbing the rope, rock underground is very chossy, but they have stack ropes. There's no stretch to them. Modern climbing ropes, they stretch a lot. Otherwise, a fall might result in things like broken backs. So there's a stretch which cushions the fall somewhat. So I knew that, but I wanted more security than that. I'd heard about a couple of guys who jumped off a formation in Colorado, in the Rockies, in the States, who were doing big jumps on a rope. They had a backup. They're climbing bums. They're not wealthy. And they had an old rope, but they had a backup that was attached that would only come into play. It was attached more loosely if the first rope failed. So I knew about that, but I heard that some guy had broken a rib. I didn't want to take a chance breaking a rib. And then there's a stuntman named Dar Robinson, who he had records, the highest distance jumping into an airbag, things like that. He had a very innocuous death, but I won't go into that right now. I'd heard he jumped off that huge formation, that tower in Toronto, Canada, and he had some device called a fly. It's a deceleration device. As he got down, it slows you down because, what injures or kills you is the sudden stop. it severs your aorta or destroys your spleen. Well, I thought maybe that's the key, but then I realized it was on a wire, not a rope. The third thing, this is just when bungee jumping began. I'd only heard about 2 bungee jumps being. There was a crazy group called what was it called? The Adventures Club of London or something. It was out of Oxford, and the Dangerous Sports Club. They'd have a guy at the top in a tuxedo playing a piano. I found out years later that a friend of mine, an ophthalmologist, was the climber in that group who knew how to rig the stuff. They did a couple of bungee jumps. One was off a bridge over the Arkansas River in Colorado, a very high bridge, and the other was off the Golden Gate Bridge, in San Francisco. And they were using, this was beginning of bungee jumping, and it turned out the bungees are what's used on aircraft carriers. When the jets land with the tail hook, that's what the tail hook captures to keep the jet going off the end of the ship. So I thought, I'd heard when they jumped, and these were illegal jumps. They never got the authorities' permission. So I heard that there when they did this in the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, which is a couple hundred miles from where I live. They confiscated the bungee cord. So I thought maybe this was the answer for me. So I can't believe I did this. I posed as a journalist, and I went down and I said, I was doing an article on that, and could I please see what you confiscated? So we go down in the basement of the concrete rim of the base of the South Tower, the Golden Gate Bridge, and I see this bungee cord, and it's big in diameter. It's nothing like a climbing rope. This is not going to work. So I don't know what I'm going to do, and I've said I'm going to do this scene, and I'm doubling for Roger again, but I'm also the technical advisor for the climbing scene, which I was not properly credited for. In The Spy Who Loved Me, they gave me an opening credit. As far as I was concerned, they didn't have to. It wasn't in the contract. I never would have thought of asking for it. And, credits are very important to actors and people on the other side of the camera. I never had a film career, so it wasn't important to me, but it was very flattering. They said, in the opening credits, after Kai Simon singing Nobody Does It Better, there's my name, Ski Jump By. I'd never seen that before in any film, that a stunt person is recognized in the opening credits. And they've done it once or twice since then, the Bond people, Michael and what's her name? But, Cubby's daughter. Anyway.
Barbara, yeah.
Barbara Broccoli. I really should have had a credit as technical advisor for the climbing scene. My name is listed at the top of the climbing team, but I never asked for that, but I was a little bit chagrined. Anyway, beginning the filming for 4 Your Eyes Only is on the island Corfu. We flew into Athens and got over there, flew into Corfu. And the first thing I did, I run over the stunt department. I get down on my knees. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit for dramatic effect, like Sarah Bernhardt. And I said, you got to save my life. I've signed up to do the stunt, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. And this is why these guys, are who they are. I've always believed in simplicity as far as safety. A lot of people think climbers use a bunch of knots. When you're a Boy Scout, which I was, that was the first thing that got me out into, the outdoors. You learn a bunch of knots. And climbing, usually you only use 2 or 3. And so what these guys did, and I heard later that it's become a standard for this type of thing, they designed this box. Unfortunately, it looked like an elongated coffin. And I was getting superstitious again. You didn't have to be an English major to see the symbolism. The first thing that happened when we arrived in that village, after taking the ferry from Corfu to the mainland, the first thing I saw, there was a funeral procession, Greek Orthodox Church. That was not a good sign. The second thing was the location which I scouted, which was in cut at the bottom, as I mentioned. Uh, you could look down and you could see the town cemetery from there. The third thing was this box, which they designed. It looked like a coffin. So, but what it had, and I posted a photograph, lying on my back with my arms crossed, like, I'm the deceased, which I used to use on slideshows. Anyway, it had a bunch of 30-pound sandbags, and one of the ropes, and again, I had two ropes, so it looks like one. One of them goes into that box. And when I got to the end of the long fall, it would pull these sandbags forward. That would, along with the natural stretch in the rope, that would diminish the shock of that long fall. The other rope was just anchored outside the box. So what happens? I think these sandbags, each of them weighed 30 pounds. We displaced about 15 of them. So that becomes 450 pounds. You could say about 3 times my weight. So you could say I generated 3 Gs. So that was what these guys developed. And I did a test before my doing the thing, which is really heavily weighing on my head then. And my wife was, and my daughter, 2-year-old daughter, were there on location now. I attached 5 of those sandbags, which, that would be 150 pounds. I weighed about 135 then, and threw them off, and it worked. And I always thought there were more brains in those 5 sandbags than in my head, but it worked, fine. So then I did the thing, and I had my little mess up, where I was moving when I got to the end. I was supposed to be completely still, like I was shocked by the huge fall before he starts climbing up the rope again, as the pitons are being knocked out by the butt of the pistol. So that thing again, which they would have been happy with a fall half the length, and I said I'll do the whole length because I thought it'd be safer, which I regretted the moment I uttered those words. That's how that came to happen. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I somewhere heard that that's become what these guys developed. It was such a simple thing, this to decelerate, having those sandbags pulled towards the edge of the box, which attached to the rope. That's how that came about. Especially, these guys from the very beginning. Chaplin and Buster Keaton. This is the beginning of cinema.
Yep.
And so much of it was chases. And even then, they were doing film magic. They're so freaking inventive. I was a liberal arts major, humanities and liberal arts. I have very low skill engineering. I do not have that type of brain power. The Guardian article, I don't know if you should check it out, 25 best stunts in movies. It also has YouTube footage with most of them. You know the famous scene of Harold Lloyd hanging from the hands of the clock, stories up in it.
Yeah.
Okay. For years, I wondered how they did that. Well, if you see this, it explains it. It's ingenious what they did. I could not believe it. The crazy thing they were able to do with camera angles and so on, from the beginning of cinema, in the early 1900s, it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And you look at the way that's impacted modern film. Tom Cruise is still trying to chase, what they were doing then, and some would say hitting those levels too.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a thing too, where it's not a stuntman, an understudy, where the main actor is doing the stunt. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just looking at sort of the For Your Eyes Only stunt. It's interesting you mention the Eiger sanction earlier, because it's a film Cam and I are quite familiar with as well. And of course, Clint at the end of that film does a drop on his climbing rope as well that he cuts, and there's like a secondary rope I think he holds on to. A little bit of a connective tissue there. But one thing I wanted to touch on before I sort of wrap us up is you mentioned Roger Moore a few times, and obviously when you're shooting The Spy Who Loved Me, as you say, third unit mostly. You're not with Roger for that, of course, but there was some time spent with Roger doing For Your Eyes Only. Can you just talk a little bit like what Roger was like to work with? Any particular stories of spending time with him over the years?
Well, I regret that I didn't spend more time with him. This guy, the first unit, the second unit, you know, I'm, I think they were staying in a different hotel in, oh, I'm forgetting how to pronounce the name of the Greek town we were in. Um, he's, you see actors on TV talk shows all the time. Some of them are very good, very glib. Other ones are only good when they have their lines, in the films they're working on, memorized. Roger's the first category. I saw some interviews of a few years ago. He's very sharp. He could think on his feet. He has a great sense of humor. A lot of it's ribald, but I really didn't spend very much time, hardly any time with him, and I wish I had. In fact, he was at some function where I live here, where I could look across the meadow. There's on the other side of the meadow here in Squaw Valley. There's a big resort development, and he was at something there. I wish I'd known some celebrity thing. I wish that's less than half a mile from where I live. I wish I'd known he was here. I would have loved to have looked him up, or vice versa. So I'm very impressed by Roger, but I really had, even though we had the first unit there, I really had very low interaction with him.
Sure. No, that's fair enough. And I suppose it's interesting. Looking at your career with Bond, you have played James Bond in two different films. It's almost funny that you've actually. I'd say in some ways you're more of a legitimate James Bond than perhaps George Lazenby, who only played James Bond once. So you've got that going for you there.
Well, I heard some stories from those two guys who did that 2-inch thick book of Bond. The detail, I really find that fascinating. A lot of people think he did a great job. The reason, whether I got it from that book or elsewhere, that he never got a second role, Lazenby, was not because he wasn't good, but he asked for more money than they were willing to proffer. One of the great pleasures for me of having worked on those two films, as well as having survived both stunts, and I had my doubts about that, was working with Cubby Broccoli. It was a complete pleasure. Normally, an understudy, someone stunt doubling would never even, meet the producer. I've always thought one of the reasons that the Bond films, they were very egalitarian. You hear these stories about all the stuffy noses in Hollywood and so on, but as you guys know, it's really a family business, and everyone, the way they just treated with people, I can't help thinking that something that contributed to success of the Bond films. There was one thing when I met Cubby at his house, which is just a few blocks from the house where I did my formative years, in Beverly Hills, and it was owned by the famous French actor. The term that we see so much now, gaslighting, is from one of his films. Anyway, we actually just a few blocks away from where eventually Cubby Broccoli had took up his residence. And so I get in his Ferrari with him, and we're driving to MGM in Culver City. He ground a few gears, but a man in his station is supposed to have a Ferrari. But it was a complete delight. And everyone says this about Cubby Broccoli. It was that was one of the highlights, my, association with him. As a result of that, in what's her name's book, supposedly Sean Connery said some very nasty things about him. And I was always thinking, God, if I could have met Sean when he was alive, I want to ask him about that, because my experience was the complete opposite. But I think I know what's behind it. It was probably money. I the Bond films, even though they show endlessly in film festivals and on the telly and everything, the company is chartered in London. They don't have to pay residuals like Screen Actors Guild has to, and so on. And I think what Sean Connery was quoted as saying that Cubby and his original partner, they were very tight-fisted with money. I think that is what led to his very negative comment about them, which is a shame. But I remember there's an article that I saved in my scrapbook I came across in the LA Times decades ago, where Cubby says, we never use a name actress. This has changed. As you guys know, the Bond films are very formulaic. There was always the meeting with Q, the quartermaster, who shows them the latest gadgets and so on. Of course, that didn't happen in the last few films. But one of the things was what Cubby said in this article, we don't need to spend the money for named actress. That's why we were able to afford, my stunt.
Yeah.
Now that's also changed. Now the last Bond films I have had named actresses, besides Daniel Craig playing up to now Bond. So finances were always part of the equation.
Well, I mean, there's that famous quote from Sean Connery when he did the press interview. He was asked who the best Bond villain was, and he replied, "Cubby Broccoli." There was definitely some bad blood in that camp. I think money was very much to do with it. But I think even Sean in his later years would have said that his career probably hinged on Bond, whether he wanted to admit it or not. So I think he probably made his peace with it too.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Agents, where are you? Why do you hide? Follow that Patreon trail and make Spyhards your guide.
That's right. From Spy TV reviews covering the antics of George Smiley, Jack Bauer, and the Slow Horses to reviews of non-spy movies from your favourite spy actors, there's no more secrets over on our Patreon. But Cam, tell the listeners about this week's top secret broadcast.
Suffering from the summer doldrums? Well, we have the cure for you. Jump on over to the Patreon and catch up on our July offerings. I'm talking about reviews of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and Gran Torino, plus the 1989 HBO TV movie Red King, White Knight. Get them while they're hot, people.
So deactivate Ghost Protocol and visit patreon.com/spyhards to truly do things angel style.
But before we close Channel D, on with the Spy Jinx.
I suppose then, as slowly wrapping us up, and I think that's actually a good point to transition us over, looking at more holistically, obviously, as you said at the beginning of this conversation, you're not a stunt man. You never have been, but you're responsible for arguably the greatest stunt in James Bond history. I'm curious, including For Your Eyes Only, but, The Spy Who Loved Me, the ski jump, what sort of impact has it had on your life being in those films?
Well, it would make a very nice resume item, except I've never done a resume in my life. It's nice to be I think it was a John Lennon lyric in one of his songs. It's something to be a neighborhood. I'm forgetting the right term. A working class hero. It gives me some status here where I live. Though I also had that from some of the first descents I made in the ski resort here. But it really didn't change my life that much. It's a very colorful thing. For most people, it'd be the only thing that they'd know me, even though, compared to all the climbing and skiing, it's just a very small fraction. But I came from good financial circumstances. My father was a very successful builder and developer, so it wasn't like it kept me out of the poorhouse. And again, the thing about credits, I don't really have a film career, so I didn't need those credits to get future roles. It's a sort of anomaly. So it really, I mean, I do all the, which is considered, I do all the kind of stupid, all the work around my house and everything, which is very modest. But even though I did my, formative years in Beverly Hills, um, it did not, I have interviews like this occasionally, which is very flattering and so on. And occasionally I get things in the mail to sign as an autograph. I read a great line years ago. Again, I collect lines that a movie star needs 100,000, pick the term, the number, letters a day, fan mail, to keep up his or her spirits. A scientist needs a nod once a year from an esteemed colleague. I definitely fall more into the latter category.
Well, and you say like never having to do a resume. Just the question springs to mind. I felt like I was wrapping up, but the question jumped out to me, so it feels natural to ask. Why did you not wish to pursue any more films, or was it not a choice you made? I mean, did you want to do any more work in action films? Obviously, they brought you back For Your Eyes Only for your climbing skill. But you must have been known for doing this stunt from The Spy Who Loved Me. Were you ever approached to do any other productions?
That's a good question. I was approached once. For a while, there was a TV version of the Guinness. Again, you Brits call it Book of Superlatives. We call it the Guinness Book of Records. There was a TV version, and I was contacted to repeat the ski base jump in New Zealand. And I always wanted to go to New Zealand. It's a beautiful place, especially the South Island, which is the mountainous one. And they were offering a very small sum. I mean, the stunt itself has no intrinsic value. It's who's paying for it, who could use it. They can't match the budget of a Bond film. And again, on a daily basis, just going climbing, you might say I'm risking my life, but that's my passion. But when you're doing something that someone else could profit from, you feel the pay should be commensurate. So I turned that down. And there was another reason too. I had two cousins that I was paying for the flight from New York. I did my first 3 years of my life in Brooklyn, New York, before my folks moved to California in 1945, who I'd paid for a trip to them to visit. They lost both of their parents. They were orphans. And I didn't feel it was right to cancel that. For a combination of that reason and the lower amount, I didn't follow through. As far as doing regular stunt work, I was not capable. I was not qualified. You see the amazing stuff that Keaton did, who began his career on vaudeville, and guys like Jackie Chan, which is a lot of, gymnastic ability. I never had that. I get dizzy from one forward somersault. The usual things that stunt people do, all the falls and so on. I wasn't qualified for that stuff. Now, as far as films in general, when I did the original Jumps Off El Cap, that was supposed to be a movie in the tradition of Buster Keaton. I shot a bunch. I took the money I'd made in the first Bond film. It was the second. And I've never finished it. So, I mean, that's the big work in my life, and I bogged down. So I did want to make I didn't want to make just a documentary. If that had been my goal, maybe would have done years ago. I don't believe in astrology, but I once read years ago that Aries are good at which I am. I'm starting because we're not finishing. And I said, well, maybe that's me. Maybe there is something to this astrology. But so I have this film with this identifiable character. His name is Patch. He always wears a coat with a patch on, like Harold Lloyd had his pork pie hat and Buster Keaton had his look and so on. Harold Lloyd also had the glasses. I was in that vein, but this is something, and then now there's all kinds of continuity problems. But so I did have one film I wanted to make, which as I say, I haven't finished. But the idea of just doing the regular stunt work, again, I'm not qualified.
No, I mean, perfectly valid answer. And I think, in terms of like going back to reflecting upon its impact in your life, it's interesting that like it did, but it also didn't. It's such a small fraction of the actual time you spent in your life doing something. But I'm glad that we can have this conversation and really celebrate it because, we were talking about The Spy Who Loved Me earlier this month and just how impactful that jump is. And you mentioned the Olympics in 2012. It's definitely a callback to that. But also other films have referenced this. I think even like Austin Powers did a similar thing in one of their films, if my memory serves. But that shot, that moment, that stunt, it has become iconic. And I suppose that leads me to my second to last question. You mentioned all these people, Buster Keaton. Cam and I are both big fans of his work. Actually, he's done a few spy movies in his time. People refer to this stunt, and we've had a lot of stuntmen that have worked on Bond films over the years. A lot of stunt coordinators that have put stunt sequences together. One notably who did many of the Daniel Craig films, Gary Powell, and he said your jump was the reason, or one of the reasons, why he got into the business. That was for him the most iconic moment in stunt work, let alone James Bond or anything in film. So the question I have for you is, you're clearly a lover of film yourself. Putting to one side maybe the parachute jump from The Spy Who Loved Me, what is your favorite stunt of all time in film?
Let me back up for a bit and mention, of all the people who said they were influenced by what I did, my favorite was Eddie the Eagle. Remember the ski jumper who probably was not very qualified for the Olympics, but didn't have the regulations. Now each country could send a minimum number of athletes in each category of, skiing and everything. And he said this is what influenced him, and I love that. That was so funny. I also want to mention one thing about it was a very special thing in my life, but with mountaineering and climbing is such a rich life. When I got into climbing, I was doing a year of graduate study in Stockholm with my Scandinavian literature and language major combined with my sociology. And I took a climbing class. I had a low introduction in a crag in the Berkeley Hills, but I went to a climbing class in Switzerland, and the director, who's an American, who started this school called International School of Mountaineering, later they dropped the modern, being a bit too pretentious, John Harlan. 3 months before I was signed up in June for a week, a learn to climb week, he fell 4,000 feet to his death on the Eiger Direct. The big thing then, competition between the Italians, the Germans, and John Harlan, the American, who put together, pardon the cliche, a dream team of Dougal Haston, a very good Scottish ice climber, though he was good all around, and Leighton Corr, who was one of the top American or world rock climbers. And this was a big deal. The original Eiger, the North Face of the Eiger has always been a poster child for the dangers of mountaineering. Several died. It's the biggest face in the Alps. It's 2,000 meters high. And there were many deaths before it was successfully climbed. And Hitler wanted to give gold medals to the ones who eventually were the first 2 Austrians and 2 Germans who joined together on the way up. Anyway, it's a very circuitous route that follows weaknesses in the crag. But the big idea was an Eiger Direct, a route that goes more just straight up and down. And they were using what's called siege tactics. They were doing it in winter of March because that's more difficult, but a lot of loose rock would be frozen in place. Rock falls a danger. And so they would climb as high as they could, and the weather would change bad. And they'd have a string of ropes, and they'd go down back to the hotel near the base and wait for good weather. And I was following the climb in the National Herald, which is published in English. And I had exchanged 3 letters with John Harlan about attending his climbing school at second year of his existence. And then he falls, the rope, was cut going over an edge. and he falls 4,000 feet to his death. And so when I showed up in June, thinking, God, the guy who started this climbing school, he died. What's going to happen to me? Well, all kinds of bad things have happened to me, but I haven't died yet in climbing, which is a very addictive activity. But so far, it hasn't proven to be a fatal addiction, and I still climb.
Wow.
John Willens from Lancs, from around Manchester, and Dougal Haston took over the school that summer. And Dougal was the one who got much of the work on the Eiger sanction. In fact, I was in Europe that summer when it was being filmed, and I went over to the town of Lausanne in western Switzerland, where the school is located, in this crazy place called the Vagabond Inn, where a lot of the girls got pregnant, and abortions were legal in Canada. I mean, in Switzerland, but you had to go before the hospital board. And the rumor I heard was they got tired of girls from the Club Vagabond who were coming asking for abortions. That's where I actually met my wife in '69, when 3 years later I was an instructor in that school where I'd been a student. Anyway, I go to Lausanne, and Annie, who was Dougal's wife, says, "Oh, Dougal's working on Eiger sanction. Don't bother him. He's making money for the first time in his life." But and Dougal was a world-class climber. He was on first ascents and things like the Everest and so on. So, his working on the Eiger section was, a key thing in his life. But there were so many key things in his life, and that's the analogy I'm trying to make. Working on the Bonfils were key things in my life, but mountaineering and skiing is such a rich life. There are many other things that it's competing with. So now, I just want to work that in back to, and I'm going to have to ask you, what was the question again?
Well, I think you were sort of winding towards the answer. The question was, clearly you're a lover of film and appreciator of stunts, but what's your favorite stunt of all time?
Yeah. Okay. When I was a kid, I never watched many movies. The big thing in my life was when I went away from Southern California to Northern California, Berkeley, which is a very special time in many people's lives. It's the first time they really leave home. And this is the beginning. I was a high school class in 1960. So when I ended up in Berkeley, and this is when they had a cinema, what's the term? This is the beginning of the French wave, Godot and Truffaut, shoot the piano player with Belmondo, and Fellini. This is from 60 to 65 when I was in Berkeley. The term I was looking for, art houses. You had art houses then.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great period in cinema. Not that there hadn't been previous great periods. This is when I began to love cinema. Most of the films I saw were subtitles. There were a lot more exports, comedies from Italy, blah, blah, blah. All the great directors, Eisenstein from Russia, the Apu trilogy from India. This is when I started loving cinema. Now, a lifelong love, and that's when it began. As far as the greatest stunt, and I just came across something on the telly last night. Again, Keaton, and I have 3 biographies of him sitting over my right shoulder here. I'd have to say, and I can't even pick one, stuff by Keaton. Even though, Chaplin was amazing in more different ways than Keaton, but he also, his stunts were amazing. And then Harold Lloyd, of course, he had 2 main films, primarily the Freshman and what was the other one? Anyway,
Safety Last.
Safety Last, exactly. Do you know how they did that hanging from the hands clock, by the way?
No, I don't think I do actually. No.
Well, it's in that Guardian article when they show the YouTube footage. It was filmed on a completely different rooftop. They built a little tower. I mean, I knew that he's not 6 stories up. I thought it was in Manhattan, but it's actually in LA. They built a tower, and with the camera angle, the building that you think he's climbing is way in the background.
That's right. Yeah.
It was amazing. I couldn't believe. I mean, I knew he wasn't 6 stories up with no safety, but that's how they did it. Anyway, so that question got answered after all these decades. And I can't even pick one thing, but of course I could pick my own thing, but I'm not going to. I'm gonna say I'm not gonna pick any one. I'm just gonna say Buster Keaton.
I don't think you'll hear arguments from Cam or I against it. I mean, we recently spoke about the General last year on the show, and I mean, there's like a stunt in that where he has to throw a wooden beam to knock another wooden beam out of the way, and if he hadn't have made that shot, he would have derailed the train and probably killed himself. And you just think about like that he just did for cinema, and I think it really sort of connects to what you did. You took your life into your own hands and made history, both of you. And I think there's probably a reason why you were on that list next to him. And I think that was well said.
Well, I just wanted to say something. I was in college fraternity, even though I never saw myself as a fraternity type, if you wanted to do stereotypes, when I was at Berkeley. And I had a roommate one semester, 1 year, Roger Chernus, and he said, "You have to see Buster Keaton." And I said, no, I'm not interested in that type of humor. It's not my type of humor, not even knowing what I was talking about. And then, a couple years later, when I was in Stockholm, there was a Buster Keaton festival, and I started going to it, and I was completely blown away. And I realized Roger was right. That was how I discovered Keaton. And I found, and it's great you mentioned General, because there was in Brussels, they had some conference where again, this is subjective, 10 greatest films of all time. And The General was the only comedy among what they voted as among the 10 greatest films of all time. And when I watch Keaton, I don't find his films dated. I find them completely applicable to today. And the one of the ones with Steamboat Bill, that I think The Navigator is, even the what's the term for the these silent films, for the writing that they had, it said in every family tree there was one sap. Even that was funny. And they show this scene with Keaton. He's very wealthy. He walks down the steps. He gets the limousine. The chauffeur opens the rear door. Keaton gets in. The guy makes a U-turn and parks across the street. Keaton walks up the steps, knocks on the door. The girl answers. He asks her to marry him. He turns it down. He gets back, walks down the steps. The chauffeur rushes around to open the door. Keaton says, "No, I'm despondent. I think I'll take a long walk." He walks across the street back to his mansion. And that's how it begins. It's brilliant. You can't top this stuff.
I would agree about it not feeling dated even today. I think I'm glad we've got someone like Tom Cruise running around out there still now making films, because it feels like he's probably a modern day Buster Keaton in many ways.
Well, I actually felt a bit negative a while ago.
Sure.
Because when the film comes out where he does the motorcycle thing, and then and I'm reading the reviews in a local San Francisco paper, which I get here. It said, "This is the greatest stunt in history." I said, "Well, what about my deal? Wait a minute, I did this years ago. I wasn't looking at. I'm just a second unit, double."
You needed a motorcycle, Rick. That's what that was. It just, you were almost there, but you just needed a motorcycle, apparently.
Oh, I see. I shouldn't. Skis don't count.
Right? No? Exactly. Okay, well, this is the last question, and this has been asked to every single person we've ever had on the show. Many years of interviews. No pressure, but everyone's listening, and they need to know the answer to this question.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, indeed. Rick, Spyhards podcast, we've been talking about spy movies for the last 5 years. We love spy films. It's why we're talking about The Spy Who Loved Me. It's in the title. You've clearly gone on to watch a lot of films. We want to hear from you, Rick. What is your favorite spy movie of all time?
Well, I am not good, and my memory is a very tricky thing.
We can help. We can help if you want prompting or.
Well, there are some things I remember. I've had my memory praised by friends. There's some things I remember perfectly. and a few of them turn out to be accurate. And there are huge gaps, but I don't remember at all. You want to know my favorite movie involving spy? Guy.
I will say this: The General, the Buster Keaton film, is a spy film.
Oh,
So-
that's right. You're right. Because what I hear a lot. I think you get it over there in Britain. You get Stephen Colbert. One of the main hosts of a 5-day-a-week show, and he has this thing with celebrities where he asks them their favorite action movie. And I always felt if I was in that position, I was going to say Seven Chances, one of Keaton's film. I mean, the amazing running scene where he goes down the hill and all these giant boulders of probably paper mache falling. But the his acrobatic ability, it began with his career in vaudeville, where, the story that I heard in one of the books was they were in New Haven and some kids in the second row from Yale University were heckling, and his dad picked him up, Keaton. His dad had an art act. They were also on vaudeville with Harry Houdini. His dad was a high kicker. He could kick off a hat of a guy who was 6 feet 6 inches tall. But his dad picked him up and he threw him at one of these college students in the second row that was heckling. And from that, they incorporated into the act where he picked up Buster and threw him against the curtain on the stage. He actually had a suit that was sewn and he had a handle. And that's how his career began, with all the amazing falls he did. And he broke many bones. He had many serious injuries in his life. I mean, he fell flat on his face. He wasn't breaking the fall with his arms or anything. There's no way to fake these things. So Seven Chances, which was remade with another actor, which wasn't bad, but it wasn't Keaton. I was always going to say that would be my favorite action film. I could answer that one. But the one involving spy, I mean, there's Graham Greene's, books that were made into movies, which are fantastic. One of Orson Welles' film, I suppose he has the longest opening sequence. I'm not sure how to affirm it.
Oh, Touch of Evil.
Touch of Evil. Yeah, that's a. I took a couple of film classes up here at University of Extension. The instructor was Thomas Sherry, who was an NBA player, but he also was before the multi-million contracts. He also ended up being just an English department teacher. And I took a couple of classes from him. Film is Noir, and the other one was called Film is Literature. And he was the one who made that remark that Touch of Evil has the longest opening nonstop sequence in history. Charlton Heston, whose son used to come over our house and play with one of my two younger sisters. And that was before he was associated with the NRA. So he didn't have a negative image as he later would acquire. I don't know if Touch of Evil is that's not really a spy film.
It has sort of some elements of, yeah.
Some elements. And of course, then there's all the Hitchcock, stuff. I went to a whole series I remember the film series I went to when I was at college more than most of my classes, even I liked a lot of my classes. But I don't know. That was kind of a vague answer. I'm sorry to end this on a low note.
Well, to be fair, I mean, you've charted the course of going all the way back to Buster Keaton films. You mentioned Touch of Evil, and then you said Hitchcock, and Hitchcock had several spy movies to pick from. So I think, and even you mentioned like the adaptations of Graham Greene things, like you've had Ministry of Fear and Third Man, stuff like that. Wait, was Third Man Graham Greene?
Yep, that's right. Yeah,
I was right. So
Third Man, right?
It's late at night here, so I'm losing my marbles slowly. So I think.
Well, speaking of,
go on.
I got to make an interjection because something very special happened. There was a guy. He was a programmer for the San Francisco Film Festival, which I've never attended, and his name was Albert. Johnson. He put together some of these series. He put together the Hitchcock film, and then he put together a series of films by what's his name, who did Dr. Strangelove and so on, and Spartacus and everything.
Oh, Kubrick.
He put together Kubrick, and he said this is America's greatest living director at the time. And at the end of the series, we were able to see half of Dr. Strangelove because it was on being released, and for contractual reasons, we could only see half of it. And at the end, the last night after this was once a week, we saw the very first film Kubrick ever made. It was a documentary called Flying Padre about a priest in Arizona who would fly a light plane out to his parishioners on their various ranches. And then The Killing, an amazing film, and Paths of Glory, not to be confused with Tunes of Glory with Alec Guinness, but Paths of Glory with what's his name?
Kirk Douglas, yeah.
Kirk Douglas, amazing. The Killing, when people say Kubrick, they don't think of The Killing and Paths of Glory, but those are two. And I haven't seen all of Kubrick's films. Anyway, the last night, we were the audience members were able, if they had any questions for Kubrick. He was in New York, 3-hour time difference, so it's quite late, and I apologize for interfering with your bedtime with this call. But anyway, one of my questions, we were able to submit questions, and one of my questions got read to Kubrick, and I can't remember what it was, but that was a great moment for me.
Wow.
There's not many people that can say they had a question given to Kubrick. I think I'd take one of my arms off to sit down with him and pick his brain.
And was it you guys was it you and our correspondents or someone else who mentioned that Kubrick's daughter was worked in one of the Bond films, works, on the Bond films?
Well, Kubrick himself worked on the film you were involved with.
Kubrick worked in a Bond film?
On The Spy Who Loved Me, yeah. He helped light the submarine sequence.
So he was a technician before being a director?
No. So he was basically, he did it. I can't remember who the DP was on The Spy Who Loved Me to the top of my head. Cam can maybe find the name. But basically, the DP was having trouble lighting the set of the submarine pen at the end of the film. Because it was huge. And he knew.
It was the Ken Adam, who had done the set, had worked with Kubrick in the past and called him in as a favor for some assistance.
Oh, okay.
So you've been in the same film as Kubrick has worked on. So there you go.
Well, that's fantastic. But someone told me recently that Kubrick's daughter also worked in Bond films. So this is all news to me.
Well, Rick, it's been an honor and a pleasure speaking with you, getting to celebrate The Spy Who Loved Me, getting to talk about For Your Eyes Only, and more Iger-sanctioned discussions than I thought we'd have in this conversation. But I'm glad we spoke about that film too. I want to thank you for the time. I want to thank you for your favorite spy movie, and I thank you for the stories, and ultimately thank you for saying yes and taking that leap of faith off the side of that cliff.
Well, it's been a complete pleasure for me too. I actually have to say ditto. This has really been fun, and I thank you very much.
Whoa, there you go, folks. That wraps us up for the July Who Loved Me.
And what an epic ending it was, with Rick's just, again, a 2-part account to 2 of the big iconic stunts of the Roger Moore era and the Bond era as a whole, because everyone thinks, of course, about the parachute jump, but that fall in For Your Eyes Only, which we talked about in this particular episode, that is one of those moments that it may not make the kind of top 3 Bond action moment list, but when you see it in the film, when you're actually watching For Your Eyes Only, your breath is sucked in when you watch Roger Moore plummet.
Well, I completely agree, and I think For Your Eyes Only often gets sort of the raw end of the deal when it comes to the Roger Moore era. People will talk about Live and Let Die, or talk about Spy, or they talk about the other end of it with A View to a Kill or Golden Gun. But things like For Your Eyes Only, Moonraker, and maybe Octopussy they're the middle of the road of the Roger Moore films and don't really get as much love. And because For Your Eyes Only is perhaps the straightest of his films, it's the one that doesn't get talked about half as much because it feels the least like a Roger Moore Bond film.
Yeah, no kidding. And you're right, it doesn't have the flash of Moonraker and doesn't have that kind of revisionist appreciation for the goofiness that Octopussy has.
Yeah, or just pure goofiness that A View to a Kill has.
I mean, yeah, a movie that has become, I think, more and more popular because of how insanely crazy it is.
Well, especially when you compare it to today's output, the Daniel Craig era, which I'm not deriding. I'm a fan of Daniel Craig's Bond films. This is not an anti-Daniel Craig Bond podcast because there's already enough of those out there. This is just me saying that is the antidote to that. If you've seen too much of Spectre or No Time to Die, maybe it's time to put on A View to a Kill.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly. A nice little antidote to seriousness. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Because it really is the opposite of that. But yeah, we've spoken about the Rick Sylvester interview. We've talked about things we liked in part one. I'm just so humbled that we've managed to do this. I hope you guys have enjoyed this sort of month-long celebration of the film. We won't do this very often. This will be reserved for films that, one, we can get these sort of interviews for,
Yeah.
and two, it's big enough and important enough to the spy movie canon that we will do it.
Yeah, and within the spy movie canon, when you look at the Roger Moore Bond era, this is the one. This is the one that people look at as Roger Moore's shining star, his Goldfinger, if you will, of his Bond run. And it's the one that I think calls out the most for the sort of behind the scenes insights into what was going on that film. And I like that we got this very varying kind of collection of stories from, Rick, who's doing these incredible stunts in these two films, but, arguably the most famous moment in The Spy Who Loved Me. You could debate between that and the underwater Lotus scene. That one also probably jumps out to people, but that parachute jump is classic, and every time there's some sort of montage made in terms of the Bond films, it's always like a prime position moment. But also just like talking to actors who were playing like these smaller supporting roles in different locations throughout the film, giving us an insight into the locations of The Spy Who Loved Me, as well as what it was like to work with Roger Moore or Barbara Bach. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this wasn't a scattershot approach. This was tailored by me and Cam to talk about different parts of The Spy Who Loved Me. I mean, you've got it coming from the opening sequence perspective, which Rick Sylvester we've done. You got Vernon Dobchev, who of course was working with Barbara Bach, Richard Keel, Roger Moore. He did all this. He got to get killed by Jaws. Like that's kind of why I targeted him for. You got Valerie Leon, who is the Bond girl, or one of the Bond girls of the film. An interesting experience all in itself, and she's in two Bond films, much like Rick. So that's what sort of pulled me to her. And then Garrick Hagon, of course, was there for the entire Liparis sequences, one of the biggest set pieces of the film. So I wanted to get flavors of all throughout the film. That was kind of how we designed it.
And we should also note Valerie was in Sardinia, which is one of the most beautiful locations in the film, and so we got to look into that beautiful location as well.
Yeah, some people out there will do celebrations of Bond films in their own way. There are people out there that do like a one episode. There are people out there that will do 10 episodes that will run for 24 hours long. That's how they like to do it. Our version of doing a celebration of a film will be doing it through interviews and getting, in-person perspectives of what it was like to make that film, because the filmmaking and the filmmaking process, I think, is what we've learned over the years is what speaks to us the most.
Yeah.
We both enjoy that.
100%. And, I saw people online posting, people they wanted us to talk to about The Spy Who Loved Me, who we didn't necessarily get to. That doesn't mean we won't at some point in the future.
Yeah, people have been asking about Carolyn Monroe, Susie Vanner. There's a few other names. They're on our radar. I've spoken to the representatives of all of those people, and we probably will be speaking to them at some point. We could have done this for more than a month, but I wanted to get different point of views throughout the film.
Imagine if we did The Spy Who Loved July every year, and it was all Spy Who Loved Me guests. So, imagine 5 years from now, who are we going to?
Catering department?
The people that sold Cubby Broccoli the spaghetti?
Yes. We'll track them down in Egypt.
Yeah, exactly.
Who made the pots that he cooked the spaghetti in? Le Creuset? Hello, it's Scott from Spyhards. Let us know what you think of doing it this way. I've really enjoyed it, and but that has wrapped us up for that, and it's also been part of our sort of 5th birthday celebration, which is going to continue into August, and we'll talk a little bit about that next week in our episode. And we've got something coming up towards the end of August, beginning of September, that for me is a real passing of the baton from 5 years to now. So we'll come back to that, but let's focus on what happens next, Cam, because we're moving away from James Bond, and we're moving away from The Spy Who Loved Me. What are we talking about next week?
We are tackling the 1979 cult comedy favorite, The In-Laws, starring Peter Falk and Alan Arkin.
Yes, it's not one I'm particularly familiar with, but it is one that has been mentioned to us before we've been asked to tackle it. It seems to be up there with kind of those comedy classics of Spies Like Us and and Ishtar and things like that, which mixed opinions online. So we'll go into it. But what I do know is we've got a great guest joining us, and this was his pick. He is a passionate fan of the In-Laws, so that's the energy we're going at it with.
That's right. Yeah. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy this conversation. Tackling comedy is sometimes really hard. And we've already recorded this episode. And I think we kind of managed to have a lot of fun and also celebrate a comedy that a lot of people do love.
But the man joining us, I won't spoil it. You can tune in next week to find out more. But it is a comedy film we're talking about. And this man has worked on a lot of comedies, including shows like The Orville, Family Guy, and Futurama. So he's definitely got his finger on the pulse of comedy.
Definitely. And so I think this is going to be a ton of fun for all of you.
There you go. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, folks, is join us next week as we move into the month of August and look at 1979's The In-Laws. Will it be a marriage made in heaven? We'll find out. If you like what you hear on the show, you want to help support us, come and join us over on our Patreon. I make this plea at the end of every show. If you make it this far, come and join us because you're a real Spyhards diehard. You love a bit of Spyhards in your ears. Come and get more. Over 100 bonus episodes. And, it's our 5th birthday this year. Buy us a birthday present by the means of a Patreon subscription. And also, you'll be buying yourself a present because you get all those bonus episodes.
Yeah, and we've talked about other Roger Moore films like Wild Geese and Spice World, and who knows what else we'll do.
I mean, that's what you think about when you think of Spice World, a Roger Moore film.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, perfect. So come and join us, patreon.com/Spyhards. There's a link in the show notes below. And come and find us over on social media at Spyhards, SPYHARDS. But until next time, folks, Cam and I will be circling Mount Asgard, finally waiting for some good weather.